Good morning, everybody. Morning, and welcome to this first webinar of the new year. This is our first webinar series that Nature Positive Universities has done for universities, our students, our university staff members, and other guests as well who are coming along to learn more about Nature Positive Universities and the action we're doing here. Our first webinar of the series is on biodiversity action plans, strategies, and baselines, and we've got a fun hour prepared for you to get us underway to start the new year. Just a quick introduction to Nature Positive Universities for those who are new. Nature Positive Universities started in 2021 as a collaboration between researchers at the University of Oxford and UNEP to try and form a sort of race to zero style movement, but for the higher education sector's biodiversity impact. And it's been supported by the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. We launched with our founding members and our university pledge at COP15 in Montreal in 2022. And we know that higher education has a massive biodiversity footprint, from the food eaten on campuses to the land and buildings and paper and lab equipment, and it all adds up and needs to be dealt with. But furthermore, we know that universities have unique power and influence in their communities and beyond, so can play a key role in tackling the climate and biodiversity crises. That's why our four-step pledge commits member universities to calculate their baseline impact on nature, then turn these into measurable targets, specific actions using our 4Rs framework: refrain, reduce, restore, and renew, and then finally publicly report progress so we can all lead by example. And we also have our Student Ambassadors Programme to encourage students to get involved in nature restoration and support their universities to start nature positive journeys. Our students help us seize the urgency and push their institutions to be more ambitious, and can get involved practically with biodiversity surveys, creating new habitats, and sharing their experiences with our global network of students on campuses around the world. Today's webinar is all about that first step of the pledge, assessing your baseline and coming up with a strategy that the university can start to implement. So just a quick introduction to who we are. My name's Henry Grubb. I'm a PhD student at Imperial College London, and I've been working with the University of Oxford since before I started my PhD. We also have our hosts, Emily Stott. She's the Nature Positive University's coordinator.
Hello.
Hello, Emily. And Holly Thompson, who is the project assistant at Nature Positive Universities, both at the University of Oxford. Hello, Holly.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Brilliant. So what's up for today? We've got two fantastic presentations from two of our pledged member universities to listen to today. The first one will be Professor Jane Stout from Trinity College Dublin in Ireland. She's the Vice President for Biodiversity and Climate Action. And then we'll have Rachael Miller, the Sustainability Officer at the University of Melbourne. I appreciate it's quite late in the evening with Rachael, so thank you so much for coming along. Each one of those will give a presentation, and then after their presentation, we'll have a short Q&A. In the meantime, please do put your questions in the chat, and then I will put your questions to Jane and Rachael after their presentations. And then at the end, hopefully we'll have some time for some final, more general questions about this topic and maybe a bit of a discussion. So without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hand over to Jane when Jane is ready.
Great, thanks very much. And hi, everyone. Thanks very much for having me this morning. It's great to be here and speak to you all. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're doing here in Trinity College Dublin in Ireland. We are very much at the beginning of our journey. My role as Vice President for Biodiversity and Climate Action has been to develop our sustainability strategy, and we just literally launched that last week. So we are, as I say, very much at the beginning of the journey. So what I'll talk about is what we've done, the process of setting targets, and really highlight some of the challenges that we have encompassed and also hopefully some of our successes. So just a little introduction to Trinity College Dublin. We are a relatively small city centre based campus. So this is the view of Trinity College Dublin. Out on the left there is the River Liffey going out into Dublin Bay. The main campus is really quite small and quite constrained, but relatively green. But if you look carefully at that green, it's a lot of sports pitches and fairly well manicured lawns. So our first challenge really is, how do we become nature positive with so little space for nature on our main campus? I suppose the good thing is we're not starting from scratch. There's an awful lot of work that's been going on in Trinity for a long time, for many, many years. So our first environmental committee was formed in the early 90s when the recycling committee was formed, and there's been activity and action amongst staff and students ever since. But it was only in 2022 that my role, the VP for Biodiversity and Climate Action, was created. And so that's really ramped up activity. We have a national green flag accreditation for education institutions, and Trinity's had a green flag since 2013. We have a huge, and as I say, very committed and dedicated body of staff and students who've got involved in the work of the Green Campus Committee, working on water, on waste, on energy, contributing to tree planting, all of the usual kind of stuff. But in 2021, we did an audit of the biodiversity of Trinity campus, just really to try and start to get a handle on what kind of habitats we have across both our main campus and our other sites, the hospitals, the sports grounds, the other buildings and sites that we have around the city. And to try and get a handle on what's needed in terms of a biodiversity baseline and in terms of a biodiversity strategy and action plan. And I think one of the main outcomes from that was that we need more activity, we need more knowledge, we need more understanding, and we need more expertise. And from all of this activity that's been ongoing, I suppose our second challenge is, how do we build on this, but go beyond operational actions? So as a university, as I say, we're a relatively small campus, we're city centre based. We can't do an awful lot for nature on our sites. So really the operational actions are the small ones. The biggest impact we can have is through our research and our education. So what we've been doing since I started in my role then in 2022 is to develop our strategy and action plan for sustainability, focusing on biodiversity, on climate, and on health. And the process of developing this strategy has been extensive. So we did a lot of mapping, auditing, benchmarking, determining what we're currently doing, a curriculum audit, looked at our carbon footprints. And then from that, we also looked at what we did a sort of a benchmarking review. So we looked at what other universities are doing, looked at 26 universities across Europe and North America, looked at their targets, their action plans, their policies. And then we engaged in a massive program of consultation with our staff and students. So we had more than 200 one-on-one meetings with key people across the university. We had 8 focus group sessions. We had 2 open house sessions. And we asked our community 4 main questions around their vision, their priorities, what they thought the challenges might be, and what solutions they could offer. And we got really good input on what people want and also what people don't want. And I suppose the other thing that's informed our development of our strategy has been, as a public body, as a university, there's some things that we're obliged to do as part of our government's climate action plan, and as a result of being a large business that's obliged to do certain reporting. So all of this helped us to define our vision, our mission, and our values. We developed the strategy. And then, of course, there was an enormous amount of governance that we had to kind of go through in order to get the strategy signed off by the college board. And it was signed off at the end of 2023. And as I say, we just launched last week. So we, on the back of all of this consultation, this benchmarking, this auditing, we developed a vision and a mission statement. So our vision was around climate change and biodiversity loss and addressing these two issues in an integrated way, but also focusing on health. So connecting human health and planetary health. And our mission is to tackle this through everything we do, through our education, through our research, our day-to-day operations, and in partnership with collaborators internally and external communities. We also felt it was important to articulate what our values would be during the implementation of the strategy. So we wanted to be leaders and advocates. We wanted to be adaptable. We wanted to be optimistic, but also radical. So looking for this transformational change. We wanted to be collaborative, to work with others. We felt a need to be responsible and inclusive, and to embed, as I say, health promotion into our environmental sustainability strategy as well. And we wanted to go beyond the sort of the traditional green operational issues on campus that had been really dealt with excellently through the last few years, and move towards looking at everything we do. So this is what we ended up with. We identified 3 headline targets to be delivered across 4 areas. So the headline targets are tackling climate change, restoring biodiversity, and creating healthy futures. And we have 2030 targets. So for climate change, we have a government mandate to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 51% by 2030. And we've pledged to try and work to net zero by 2040. In terms of restoring biodiversity, we've a pledge to be nature positive by 2030. And in terms of creating healthy futures, is to improve physical and mental health of our community by 2030. And to do this through the 4 action areas of education, research, operations, and community. I've lost my little, there was supposed to be a little bubble on there saying that we had an extra challenge. And, you know, how do we actually do this? A challenge to doing this is that we need to break down each of these focus areas into specific objectives, specific actions, and identifying responsible bodies for each of those actions. So just under each of the focus areas, then we've got an overall objective, and then some specific objections with associated actions. So I'm not going to read through all the detail here, but just to say one of the things we have done is we've got some external funding to second some of our academic staff as Education for Sustainable Development fellows, and they've been working to try and progress the implementation of our overall objective of embedding sustainability in the curriculum. We've had lots of debates and arguments about what should be involved in terms of education for sustainable development, and we've taken guidance from international and EU level guidelines and documents. But the challenge that we have here is, do we create a mandatory common module for all of the students to develop the skills and competencies that are necessary? If we do develop that common module, how is it delivered? How does it fit into the curriculum? And who is it delivered to? So we're still working through those educational challenges. Oh, there you go. There's the challenge bubble. In terms of research, we've 4 objectives, and it's really, you know, there's a lot of research already ongoing in the university, so it's really about supporting that and really trying to break down the traditional disciplinary barriers and try and work across all areas, across all disciplines, including the arts, humanities, social sciences, the health sciences, and STEM, where a lot of sustainability research has traditionally been housed. And it's also about doing research in a more sustainable way and making sure that our knowledge is translated and disseminated to end users so it can be implemented in policy and practice. I suppose the challenge here is how to facilitate this. How do we facilitate transdisciplinary research, which of course it takes longer, is more difficult to do, we're reliant on external funding, and at the same time we need to support our research community in terms of their careers. Operationally, we have an enormous number of objectives. So 42 objectives under our operations, and we've broken down our operations into 5 areas. So to create a nature positive campus, a climate smart campus, an active campus, a circular campus, and a responsible campus. And as I say, there's already an awful lot happening, and there's things that we are obliged to do. There are challenges here in terms of, we know we've got an awful lot to do. How do we prioritise, and how do we actually do it in an extremely resource constrained system? We're in a very beautiful and very old university. A lot of our buildings are more than 100 years old, and this presents particular challenges in terms of retrofitting for climate, but also other challenges as well. And the final pillar then, community. So this really reflects the fact that none of us can do this on our own. We need to collaborate internally, externally, across disciplines, staff and students, professional staff, academic staff, external partnerships, local communities, etc. And so we've got a huge challenge in terms of communication. How do we communicate and collaborate effectively? And this is something that we're really actively working on, trying to increase that engagement and communication. So in terms of Nature Positive, so obviously we're a member of the Nature Positive Universities network. I've been explaining to colleagues what this actually means. What does it mean to be a Nature Positive university? And under our Nature Positive objective within our strategy, we have these 5 actions as a start. So our strategy has a timeline to 2030, but our action plan is, to begin with, it's a 2-year action plan. So the first action is under monitoring, assessing and disclosing risks and developing a biodiversity plan for the campus. The second is around data. The third is around awareness raising. So there's a lot of good awareness with regards to climate and climate crisis and climate actions. We want to raise biodiversity to the same sort of level. We want to actually plan for nature-based solutions and from grey to green in our campus. And we're taking part in a national initiative, the All Ireland Pollinator Plan. And we've been doing that on our campus since 2017. But I guess the challenge here is how do we go beyond just the campus? How do we measure our upstream and downstream impacts? We have approaches and methodologies we can use. What we don't have are people who can actually do that. And how do we measure nature positivity on site? So what are we measuring? Are we measuring amount of green space? Are we actually going out and surveying plants and animals and microorganisms? So we've got a lot of challenges in terms of actually doing this on site. We've had some successes, so some very high profile media as a result of trying to incorporate nature positive work on the campus. So in the pictures here, what you can see is that we chose to change the front lawns of Trinity, so the front gate of Trinity that opens out into College Green, a very busy part of Dublin city, right in the middle of the city. So we changed the management of those lawns front gate from traditional close cropped grass to ornamental meadows. And this was after a public vote, which got massive support for the initiative. And this drew a huge amount of attention, both internally and externally. Most of that attention positive, some of it negative, some comments about it looking messy and untidy. But overwhelmingly positive. And then last year, as part of a No Mow May initiative, so this is where an initiative that started in the UK, where we encourage people not to mow their lawns during the flowering season of grassland wildflowers, to allow them to come up and bloom and provide resources for pollinators and birds. And we left some of the lawns inside the campus to go wild. And really interesting orchids popped up, and we got a lot of media attention because of this orchid. But really what it showed was that if you give nature a chance, then it can come back, even in a very highly managed lawn that's been mown every week for the last 50 years. We left it alone for a month and beautiful things came up. So these were relatively easy wins, very high profile, and really giving people license to do things differently, even in a very formal city centre setting. So in terms of our lessons learned, I suppose, in terms of where we are, we're located in the middle of Dublin City. We're not a massive green site, but we are part of a network of nature. We're part of a network of green sites, and we're working with other organisations within the city, the City Council, with other businesses, with the Lord Mayor, to create networks of green areas across the city that are connected. The second lesson learned is that, as I said, you give nature a chance, it comes back. And the No Mow May initiative and leaving our lawns and seeing these 30 odd plant species come up, and this beautiful, quite rare orchid was amazing. The other lesson that we've learned is that we really need to link in with our own health and well-being. And so we work with the Trinity Disability Service, and they've created a sense map for the campus to show people where to go for certain things. And so the green spaces and then the nature spaces can be good areas for a sense of peace, of quiet, of tranquility, of rest, of recuperation for staff and students. We've also learned that external engagement is extremely important. So we've worked with other organisations who've come onto campus and planted up little plots of trees. So we've a little pocket forest, which is a small forest with a diversity of native trees in it. And it's really good to engage with these external parties. It promotes both what we're doing, but also brings them into the university and makes them part of what we're doing too. And I suppose finally, data. We need data dashboards. We don't have a good system of data, and that's what we need for tracking and reporting. In terms of the overall strategy, as I say, we launched it last week. That's myself and one of our students who actually attended COP in Dubai, the climate COP in Dubai. And we launched our strategy, and we didn't shy away from the fact we had challenges. We really highlighted these challenges. As I say, we have resource challenges, both people with the right skills, expertise and capacity, but also financial challenges in terms of upcoming reporting demands from the government, from EU directives. We've got challenges with conflicts and trade-offs in terms of finances, but also in terms of what we prioritise as a university, and making sure that we don't do something that's unfair on any particular group or body within the university or beyond. Challenges with bureaucracy. Like I said, we had to go through a lot of committees to get sign off. We've only just got our new governance committee set up. We now need a management group. We need to figure out how to interact all of these bodies efficiently and effectively, and challenges with getting people on board and keeping them on board. But as I say, amazing staff, incredible students. This student here, Jenny Salmon, she's a final year law student. She's the National Youth Delegate for Climate. She contributed to the Nature Positive University activities when she was in COP in Dubai. And, with people like that on side, I think, we have a lot to hope for. So I will stop there and thank you all very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Jane. That's brilliant. Fantastic to learn more about the work you're doing at Trinity College Dublin. I'm just going to ask a couple of questions over from the chat. We've got a question in from Julia Durkin, who asks, there's loads of amazing projects, first of all. Did you do any monitoring pre and post No Mow May? And if so, what did you do and how did you do that?
Yes, thank you. I suppose informally, the monitoring pre-No Mow May was that it was a very close-cut grass sward, didn't look very interesting. We did a survey at the end of May, a botanical survey, and found, I can't remember, 30-something species. And in finding this diversity, and particularly this lovely orchid, was a way to persuade our ground staff and our management team to leave the lawns uncut right the way through to September. And as a result of that, then the birch trees that were by the lawns seeded and the seedlings set. We dug those seedlings up, we potted them up, looked after them, and then we gave them away last week as part of our launch to draw attention to the fact we were launching our sustainability strategy. So in terms of the monitoring, it was kind of informal. We'd like to do some more next year. We've had some survey work done on the ornamental meadows at Front Gate and comparing that sort of ornamental planting of wildflowers with establishment of natural patches of wildflowers, and you get similar sorts of communities of pollinating insects, even if you've got slightly different communities of plants.
Thank you, Jane. And that formal monitoring is really a really important place to start for many of our university members. I mean, we can't all dive in with extreme data, so you know, that's definitely a good place to start. Another question from Lucy Rodriguez is, have you faced any particular difficulties engaging with external stakeholders such as the council?
No, not so far. I think the council have been extremely supportive and positive, and I think, you know, talking to their biodiversity officer, we find we can amplify each other's message. So when they come in and speak to us, you know, if Dublin City Council are on board, then it sort of legitimizes what we do, but also vice versa. When we do something, it legitimizes what other external organizations do. So far the relationship's been very positive.
Good to hear. And another question from Christelle in the chat is, what is the best way to link both the topic of biodiversity and health within the strategy that way?
That's a really good question, and I think a lot of it's around the health and well-being benefits of being in nature and being exposed to nature. So in terms of mental health and well-being, we've like many universities, we have a mental health crisis at the moment amongst our student body, and the exposure to nature, the exposure to green space. When you come into Trinity from Dublin City, it's like the noise of the traffic goes down. It's like an oasis, and so we're trying to sort of promote that idea of nature in the middle of the city actually benefiting our mental health and well-being. And then of course we're linking with the physical health as well, and we're linking with Trinity Sport, and we're linking with the idea of being outside and whether that's in nature or just outside, and being more active, and so we're working towards having an active campus promoting active travel, so walking and cycling, and so we're trying to make that link with nature very broadly, and being outside and our physical and mental well-being.
Jane, and I'll just have one more question from Abhishek, and we might be able to get to the other questions in a sec after the next. What has been the impact of your biodiversity initiatives on the high-level decision-making at Trinity? Do you feel nature has started to get a seat at the table?
Yes, absolutely. And I suppose, you know, I've been very noisy about this for the last few years, and really keen to push nature alongside climate change. So that's why the title of my role is VP for Biodiversity and Climate Action, and not just VP for Sustainability, is to really call out biodiversity and nature. So it's definitely up there. People can see the link between nature-based solutions for climate action, nature as a positive for our health and well-being, but also in terms of just the positivity that there can be around nature. You know, when we gave away the seedlings last week, it just garnered a huge amount of public positive engagement. And I think in the environmental space there's so much negativity, there's so much that's wrong, that people can get very turned off from environmental issues. And I think nature and positivity around nature can really help to engage people and can really help to promote other actions that we're taking.
Thank you, Jane. That's fantastic. We're going to move on to the next speaker now, Rachael. If you'd like to share your screen. Jane, there are a couple of other questions in the chat. Maybe you can use the reply function to type a written reply to those. But in the meantime, we'll move straight on to Rachael from the University of Melbourne. Rachael, you're still muted there, so yeah, there we go.
Yeah, I know. Thank you. Good. It's like late here. That's my excuse. So hi everyone. I'm Rachael from the University of Melbourne, and today I'd like to talk to you about our nature positive journey, and hopefully take away some good things. just to add to the stereotype of living in Australia, there's currently a huntsman spider in the corner of my mum's study. Biodiversity is making it into this chat, not just virtually. Except my slide doesn't want to change. There you go. So this is the roadmap for my presentation. I want to say this evening, but I think it's the morning for most of you. So where I would like to take you, or the destination, is I hope that the people that have logged in today will feel inspired and better equipped to either start their nature positive journeys with their universities, or for existing signatories to see a tangible example on how to meet the nature positive pledge reporting requirements that Henry went to at the start. And I hope you walk away having learned a little bit about our journey today and some of the lessons we've learned along the way, so that you don't have to figure them out on your own, and hopefully you can have more impact in a shorter amount of time. So how am I going to take you there? Well, to start off with, I'll give you a contextual overview of what has happened at our university pre-signing the pledge, and then obviously signing the pledge was, and why that was such an easy sell for me to get the VCs to sign on up. And then since signing the pledge, how we've continued to refine our approach, but speaking about our approach through the lens of this particular pledge. So I'll get right into it. So the University of Melbourne has a sustainability framework that comprises of three main elements. Our first sustainability report was released in 2015, and then that was followed in 2016 by the formation of our sustainability charter. So this is like a more or less a two-page document setting out some high-level principles that the university as an organisation wanted to adopt moving forward as a business. That led into 2017 with the release of our first sustainability plan, and a part of the framework is basically making sure that we're doing what we said we would do by reporting annually on how we're progressing against the commitments in our sustainability plan. So in the first sustainability plan, we had some biodiversity related targets. We had 4. The first target was to publish a biodiversity management plan, green tick for us, but that's a bit of a lie, which you'll see shortly. And then the second 2 targets are essentially to quantify what we had on our campuses. Now, I am a bit envious of the Trinity College Dublin with their 1 campus and other sites, because I have 7 campuses and other sites. And our campuses are not small and city-centred, so that's quite I think a unique challenge for our organisation, is the sheer massive land that we have available for this this journey. And then our last one was to complete campus-specific plans, which we very quickly learned we were never going to get there within the time frame of this planning cycle, because the task of quantifying biodiversity across our entire university estate was a monumental challenge. And when I first started with the university as a student casual, they had published this strategy. I think they were 2 years in, and then finally asked me to come on board and help them. And they didn't actually even have a definition of what the baselines they wanted to collect was. So that's why I have my starting slide. It's from undefined baselines to hopefully paving the way forward in the tertiary sector. So our biodiversity management plan, as I said, that's the 1 green tick we can hold on to for our first planning cycle. Was published basically concurrently to our first sustainability strategy. Some of its strengths were that it did include 23 actions that would have definitely improved biodiversity management, and it covered all of our 7 campuses, not just our main campus where the majority of our staff and student population reside. And probably the best thing out of this was the written words of no net loss policy of biodiversity. So when I first, as a postgraduate student, heard about this no net loss policy, I was very excited. I'm like, oh, this is fantastic. And I said, where's the policy? Can I take a look? I'd love to, you know, understand more about how it works. And I was told that that exact 1 sentence is in fact the entirety of the policy. So great in theory, not so much in practice, which hopefully you'll see from my further slides that even if it is still just one sentence for now, it has a lot more strength in actually being able to implement it once you know what you have. But quite a few lessons learned from this first plan. Most actions were never complete or started because the strategy was poorly structured. It didn't really guide actions. Actions were really vague and ambitious, but didn't really have a plan to get from A to B for each action that was included. There was no funding or resourcing plan. Assignment of responsibility was not granular enough. It was simply just a department, and whether that department was even consulted, I'm not sure. It wasn't approved very high up, so the visibility across the organisation was low. So you constantly find this uphill battle, you know, when developments come along and you're like, oh, no, we have a no net loss policy. And they're like, oh, do we? And all the decisions have already been made. And there was no impetus to report annually or that sort of stuff. So it sort of came to the end of the cycle and we didn't have too much to show for it. The huge body of work that did happen within this management plan and the couple of actions that we did address, we are still addressing to this day, which is obviously our baselines, which I will go through shortly. So that brings us to our current sustainability plan cycle. So our current sustainability plan was launched in May 2022. And the plan has 12 priority areas across 3 domains. I'll draw your attention to the green domain on the right there. This domain is called Walking the Talk in Our Operations, which I was very excited about because as an alumni, or alumnus, I should say, of the university, I was learning a lot about what best practice was and wasn't necessarily seeing that behind the scenes in the way the university operated as a business. So my particular role is responsible for delivering on the targets in the first 3 priority areas in that green one, but obviously today I'll be focusing on healthy ecosystems. So this is what our Sustainability Plan 2030 has for its aspiration for our healthy ecosystems priority area. Our university campus landscapes contribute to thriving ecosystems that support a diverse range of species. How do we intend to get there? There are 2 main targets. They're essentially the same target, but there's a checkpoint in between. The first one is hopefully to be no net loss relative to defined baseline years by 2025 and to be biodiversity, or how to achieve a net increase in biodiversity against those baselines by 2030. So these baselines, which I'll go through, are a part of our biodiversity baseline data project, which has consumed my most of my role over the past 3 years. And we also had some other indicators of performance because we acknowledge already that the baseline metrics that we were looking into weren't quite fitting the bill for certain ecological assets the university owns. So, as you can see, we are lucky enough to have already gone through an entire sustainability plan cycle and had already publicly committed to do most of the things that the pledge asks us for. So when I asked my manager whether we could sign up for the pledge, it was an easy sell, which is fantastic. But what I hope to get back from being a part of this network of 137 signatories thus far from all over the world, over 50 countries, is to be able to share our knowledge and what's worked well for us and the honesty of what hasn't worked well, so that universities that are less fortunate than my own, that don't have a person like me to focus almost their full attention at work to biodiversity, can learn from the years of work that we've already put in and hopefully make a bigger difference to the nature positive journey. So I'll just go through basically in the context of the 4 parts of the pledge, what we've done as an example for you all to look at. So the first is assessing your baseline. So I talked about the biodiversity baseline data project. We have 7 preliminary metrics, preliminary in the sense that we know that there are gaps we still need to address. Those 7 metrics I'll give tangible examples of from each of our 7 campuses on the subsequent slides, but quickly, they are plantable area in metres squared, a number of areas of significance, number of understory plant species, number of trees and tree species, canopy cover metres squared, and fauna and fungi species. Essentially, those last, the metrics 3 through 7 are just an inventorized database of the living assets the university owns and maintains. So these metrics were chosen when I first was tasked with actually figuring out what baselines we were going to calculate, because they built upon already available data. They were accessible and easy to understand by a broad range of disciplines. They can easily be embedded into operational processes, and they're quite simple and easily replicable. So our Parkville campus, which is our main campus, is just north of Melbourne in Victoria, Australia. This is an example of a dashboard from our first metric, where essentially we know exactly how many metres squared of plantable area, which includes several types of plantable area. Obviously, we've got our lawn areas, which the traditional manicured sense that was discussed earlier, garden bed areas, and containerized garden beds. So particularly in urban campuses, you have things like green roofs or pots or garden beds that have a restriction on soil volume. So we do segregate those out because there is a limitation to how much biodiversity they can contain. And the idea is that we'll see the ratio of lawn area, where we're not actively using those lawns to recreate or play, shift more towards garden bed area as a proportion, and not see that number hopefully of a decline and in fact increase. An example of our second metric, areas of significance register. I had an intern in 2020 assist me with engaging stakeholders from across all 7 of our main campuses and asked them what things on campus they thought were ecologically or environmentally significant, because there are some things that have tangible values other than just how many species or individuals there are in the population. So one example of this was at our Dookie campus, which doesn't even fit on the screen there. So that's our agricultural campus. And one of the amazing areas that was, I suppose, pulled out of the into the spotlight was our Dookie Bushland Reserve. Through this process, we learned that we have a 220 hectare nationally significant remnant vegetation patch right in the heart of our campus that even has, well, it has a number of state and federally listed endangered or threatened species, but one of those species is actually called the Dookie daisy, which is adorable. That's probably my example of a 5-cent coin. Probably isn't going to be useful to most of you from other countries, but it's probably about 1 centimetre wide. It's very small and cute. So that's something that is almost quite literally endemic to our campus, and a species that doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. So we better protect it. This is an example of our third metric, which is our plant database at our horticulture and arboriculture campus called our Burnley campus. So you can see some of the red dots that's tracking species that have been removed. We can obviously interpret trends of what has and hasn't worked, identify gaps in our species diversity, whether we're planting too much or too little of certain things, and look at the taxonomic diversity. But hopefully in the future we'll be able to do some much more sophisticated analyses. Also, great engagement tool because people can look up what their favourite tree or plant is on campus. So basically the same principle, but for trees. This is an example from our Werribee campus, which is our veterinary science campuses. We had one development in 2016 prior to this whole journey really kicking off, where we lost over 100 trees with zero requirement to make sure that we put anywhere near 100 trees back. So to get to my 2025 no net loss, I'll be doing quite an extensive amount of tree planting at the Werribee campus. And metric 6 is tree canopy cover. So we tried a number of different ways to quantify this before we determined how we would do it across our estate. There are cheap ways to do this, and there are expensive ways to do this. We started with the cheap, and then that was enough for us to be able to justify the expensive way, which is using technology called LiDAR, which is where an airplane flies over and shoots lasers at everything and then measures the time it takes for the laser to go back into the bottom of the plane and what color the wavelength of light is to basically say that is a tree and that is not a tree. So we were able to look at 2 different timestamps for all of our campuses. This one is our Shepparton campus, which is our campus for rural health. And you can see that there has been growth in the trees over just a couple of years, but also some loss from pruning and old tree failure. But we haven't been planting trees on this site for 20 plus years. So knowing that we have actually incurred losses means that we can ensure that we put things back in the ground. And finally is our last metric, which is the number of fauna and fungi. And you're probably thinking, how on earth do I figure out how many creepy crawly things that move across our site that we have, and where all the fungi that hides in the cold damp places are? And the answer is I don't. But what I do know is presence and absence, which despite being limited, is also quite powerful from a practical sense. If I know I have at least one thing of that species, I'm going to assume that we need to be doing something to protect it, and that our processes that we have as a university are not going to impact that particular species. So iNaturalist, which some of you may be familiar with, is completely free software. You can set up a dashboard. It's really easy. You don't have to be data savvy at all. You just got to fill out a quick form and you can see how much biodiversity observations you have on your defined site. So South Bank campus is our arts campus, and within a 1 kilometre radius we had almost, well, we probably now, because that screen snip is a bit old, have over 1,000 observations at this campus, and that's only in the iNaturalist platform. There are obviously other citizen science applications that you can use for specific taxa, etc. But the approach that I took was I'd go to the biggest library of available data in Australia, which is the Atlas of Living Australia, and I collaborated with a capstone subject in our Master of Data Science and got 5 students to help me basically build an automated analysis querying that database directly so that I can look up a particular species to see if it occurs on any of our campuses, and have information about where and at what point in time, and isolate threatened species, etc. So this is something I'm hoping to package up and share, at least with our Australian network, but something that could be easily replicated for local databases as well in your regions. So what do we do with all that data? There's a lot of it, as you can tell. I really do like maps and data, which it brings us to setting targets. So you can't really in this day and age expect to be able to remove all the buildings from a campus and plant it out with biodiversity and turn it into a nature reserve. So there is some limit or threshold as to what you can actually achieve. And I think understanding what that maximum carrying capacity is for some of your particular things that you're monitoring is really important, so that you can essentially define metric specific targets that are realistic but also ambitious. So a lot of those data sets throughout this year we'll be doing a deep dive. So you've got the crude high level metrics, which is what I use to easily communicate them to a broad audience. But for example, in our plant inventory, I also have information about the type of foliage and when that species flowers, so I could look at provision of flowering resources throughout seasons for particular fauna, etc. So you can really, once you've got that, what is actually quite a simplistic data set, you can retrofit that with information to really deep dive into things that you're particularly interested in addressing. Though analyses to date, even though we haven't quite finished all of metric 1, have enabled us to identify what those key drivers of loss and what the successes leading to gains of biodiversity are, because we've been able to understand what's changing over time, and where to focus our effort moving forward for our healthy ecosystems management plan. So underneath the sustainability plan for the priority area of healthy ecosystems, we have those 2 targets I went through earlier. Our healthy ecosystems management plan is actually basically going to help guide how we actually achieve those 2 targets, as well as a number of other targets, because the high level plan addresses those 2 things, but holistic best practice biodiversity management is obviously a lot more than just whether we're net loss or net gain. So this plan allows us to really extend what we're doing in that particular focus area, which sets those high-level aspirations and goals for how the university wants to operate in the biodiversity space, which will filter down into our action planning, which is due to begin later this year. We've been doing consultation all through last year, and have our draft in the process of almost finishing our draft ecosystems management plan. And those on-the-ground actions will be really driven by what those metric-specific targets are, and any other research that we are able to conduct. The third part of the pledge, act and influence, my main piece of advice would be don't wait to act. We're still calculating our first baselines for some things, but I haven't let that stop us. I don't think we really need to know how many that we should be planting trees before I know how much canopy we have on a particular site. We obviously know we want to increase canopy, and until we know the specifics, it doesn't hurt to put trees in the ground sooner, because they take a long time to grow. So balance between pursuing informed and strategic actions versus obvious low-hanging fruit. So for those that might not have the resourcing to be able to do really comprehensive baselines and data sets, doesn't mean you can't contribute and move towards nature positivity. My other piece of advice, from the 4 R's is refrain and reduce. So stop the problem at the root. If there's no requirement to protect trees from development or consequences for their removal on your campuses, then you're going to be fighting an uphill battle. Trees will be coming out just like they did at our Werribee campus. And even though I'm planting trees, if they're taking them out as I'm planting them unnecessarily, then you're constantly going to be fighting to reach positivity. So a great example of that I have recently conquered was a huge project to update our university design standards. So our design standards are basically a vehicle about how we guide development in the organisation. As I said, we have a very large estate, so there's lots of projects always happening across our estate with new builds and demos, etc. And it's how we basically get all of these outcomes from various strategic documents, like our sustainability plan and like our soon to have healthy ecosystems management plan. So these are 2 key improvements in this particular update. So prior to this update, our design standards mentioned our no net loss policy, that one sentence, and that was pretty much the extent of it. Didn't have any way for us to track, enforce, or anything like that. So one major improvement is the incorporation of a guidance note on how to do a baseline assessment for biodiversity for a particular development prior to any form of disturbance or development occurring. So this could even form site selection if you've got flexibility where you might want to build your new building, where you're picking the place that has the least impact to existing biodiversity. So that goes through practical explanations on how to calculate our 7 preliminary metrics and some other requirements as well, to make sure that we're meeting legislation at state and federal level. And then the other guidance note, if you get through your first 3 R's and you are forced to have to remove vegetation or biodiversity, one thing that I am hoping is that basically before there is approval for any disturbance or development, is that a biodiversity offset proposal is approved. And that proposal has to demonstrate after how you've tried to avoid and minimize and why you can't in a particular case, and how you're going to ensure that what you've done actually ends up resulting in biodiversity positivity for the particular thing you've impacted in the least amount of time possible. So making sure there is a process in place to ensure we are not moving backwards or below our baselines. Lastly is to report annually. So this part wasn't too hard for our first reporting cycle, pretty much incorporated pledge reporting into our existing sustainability and hopefully soon to be healthy ecosystems management plan reporting cycles. It makes providing evidence and updates easy and time effective because I can just provide the pledge with links to sections of our publicly available reports and case studies. But I think it's really great to hold us accountable for our commitments on an international stage and allow us to share our achievements within the network. So this is just a quick example of our 2022 report, which I didn't have to type too much. I just provided the link and all the information is in there and accessible to anyone within the network, including some of our data that I've shown you today. So that's me. I think I may have run a little bit over. Did I, Henry?
Keep by a little bit, Rachel. We'll do some quick fire questions. And we have plenty in the chat, of which I do want to put your attention, Rachel, to Hermione Hickling, who has said, please do share that Atlas process. She's in Perth, Western Australia, so she'd have a love to look at that. Quick question from Julia says, did you use any particular software to generate that dashboard?
Particular software. Data is data, so you can use any software, Tableau, Power BI. I particularly, because of the spatial nature of nature, it's really important to know where it is. So most of my dashboards are embedded into ArcGIS, which is all automated through, our day-to-day operations and processes. When the ground staff remove a tree, their mark it is removed and it automatically updates my map and dashboard on the website.
Jasmine Tate asks, how do you decide what trees to plant on campus when you're putting those in?
It is now in our biodiversity guidance notes. There are some recommendations on what factors to consider when selecting species, obviously looking at the existing species palette. In our urban campuses, we don't restrict just to native plantings because exotics can play a role, particularly with other environmental benefits like shade and cooling. But we also are looking at climate resilience as well, so that we know the trees we're planting today will be able to withstand future climate. So also happy to provide those resources for anyone that would like to.
Shen Yuan asks, what was, if you had to pick one, the biggest challenge that you've faced during this process so far?
I would say resourcing, which is always the case, I think. However, I'm quite savvy and determined. So a lot of the work that I've presented today is not just from my own efforts, it's from collaborating with academics and capstone subjects where I have students working alongside me to produce some of these outputs, student interns, student casuals, and the occasional funding request where I ask for a big sum of money like I did with the canopy cover. But of course, there's a lot of background, student work and interns and casuals to be able to build that business case to then get the funding allocation. So you can do a lot on the smell of an oily rag.
Very final question then, Rachel, is from Yuna Kimura. She asks, it was very inspiring to hear that, but how do you communicate and share these activities with the students on campus? Do you have any tips?
Yeah, so I am usually a client or involved in 5 or 6 subjects a semester, and that's growing. So I have quite a strong academic network now because I'm in operations, not in academia, that basically come to us and look for topics for students to address as a part of their curriculum, and we're able to provide those. So yeah, that's certainly one way I raise awareness for current student populations. We also have a lot of this information on our website and channels, but we do need to be better at communicating. I do a lot of presentations to networks like this, but I think broad level communication, I saw from the other presentation, you did a very good job at letting the public know what you're doing, which is something I think we need to also be better at, because yeah, it's sort of within those channels and circles at the moment, not too much further than that. So yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Rachel. And thank you, Jane, as well, for both of your presentations. Sorry we didn't have time to go through all the questions, although I do notice that some of the questions are going to be covered in later webinars. Take a look at our second webinar. We'll be sending around a link for registration. It's at the end of February, and that will be all about measuring biodiversity on campus specifically and how you can go about monitoring. Please do share your feedback. There's the link on the screen and the QR code if you'd like to leave some feedback. We really hope that if you're part of a university that's already a pledged member, that this webinar has provided some inspiration from how to move your nature positive journey forward. If you haven't, if you're part of a university that hasn't pledged and signed up, then do please take a look at our website so that you know how to make a pledge, and everybody can get in touch with Holly Thompson and Emily Stott on this call to ask questions and to follow up either about taking the pledge or advice if you're already a pledged university, or of course the Student Ambassador Programme if you're a student on the call and want to get involved more at your university. I think that that's pretty much all we have time for now. So thank you again, Rachel and Miller. Thank you to everybody who's attended. Thank you to Emily and Holly who have organised. I hope you have a very good night, good evening, good day, and we'll see you next month. Thank you very much, everybody.